All right, thank you so much for still staying. Let's find out what you are saying, what your contributions are. And remember, our Twitter handle is at AIT Kakaki. Well, your responses to some of the issues that we discussed last week, we see Atta S. Victor saying, a criminal like this needs prosecution to set an example for those intending to be like him, talking about Evans.
Absolutely. And you have Agu Peter Ikechu. It says Evans should be remanded in prison while the police carry out whatever investigation they need, not keeping him in their cell.
And the police should investigate and not rely on the confession of suspect alone. They are more interested in the media jamboree, and that's coming from Jim Biochor. Right there. And we have Daz 696379090. He says, into the Nigerian Security Organization, Evans, after the investigations, need to die by hanging, or how I wish I am the president.
Well, you're not the president. Well, Daz 696379090. That's his full ID there. Says, I swear to God, all those who are toiling with Nigerians must pay with their life. No wonder they won't admit us the best brains.
And on the score, Emmanuel is saying, Evans surely has top politicians he works for who won't allow him go down. A common thief will have been jailed by now.
Which is what you said earlier on. Absolutely.
Well, those were your thoughts coming in. Do keep them coming in at AIT Kakaki is the Twitter handle. And of course, it's time now for us to bring you our first conversation today. And we're looking
at the book presentation. The first combatant, Brigadier Zakaria Maimalari, is what we're discussing. The book titled The Regular Combatant, and Brigadier Zakaria Maimalari would be presented to the public on Tuesday, July 4th, 2017.
Now, the book documented the life and times of Brigadier Maimalari, who is the first regular combatant in Nigeria in the officer corps of the Nigerian Army, but was killed on the night of January 15, 1966, during the coup led by Major Chukwuma Kaduna in Diogo.
Well, the author, Haruna Pulama, chose to do this biography from the historical records and the points of view of retired military officers and some political leaders who know Brigadier Maimalari.
And so he traveled around the country to interview these leaders, statesmen, elder statesmen and women, which includes former head of state, General Yakubu Gowon.
He will be talking about what inspired the author to write the book, why he chose to write this book from the experience of retired generals and also officers of the Nigerian Army, as well as other elder statesmen and women.
We welcome the author, Haruna Yahya Paloma. Well, Haruna attended a brief biography on him. He attended Government Secondary School Kuru in Plateau State before proceeding to the University of Jos, Nigeria, where he studied political science. He also holds a Master of Arts in Peace and Development Studies from the University of Limerick, Republic of Ireland. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what inspired you to write about Brigadier Maimalari, amongst, others? I mean, people would want to wonder, is it after you interviewed former head of state, General Yakubu Gowon, from the postgraduate research work on Nigerian Civil War? Was that what inspired it, one of it?
Yes, I would say that actually deepened the interest. I had always had a background fascination about the late Brigadier, because I like to read generally about the military and so on and so forth. And he stood out even from the scanty literature I came across, as one officer who was different even amongst his contemporaries. And by the time I was doing my postgraduate studies and I had to come to Nigeria to interview General Gowon, that information just made it more compelling, if you like. And so I just said, look, this thing has to come out. Just had to try and do something.
So you interviewed the current president, Muhammadu Buhari, and you said shortly before he was inaugurated as president of the country, and then you spoke to General Yakubu Gowon, under whom, what was that distinctive attribute of General Maimalari that moved you during the revealing of these accounts?
Well, yes. By the time anybody gets to read the book, you discover that the list of contributors in the book would appear to be like a who is who in Nigeria. Now that in itself tells you that this was a very, very unique and great individual. Now, aside from that fact, Brigadier Zakaria Maimalari was the first Nigerian ever to attend a military academy and to pass out as a regular combatant commissioned officer. All the other officers in the Nigerian army before Zakaria Maimalari, I'm talking of officers like Louis Uboma, who incidentally left the army before independence, but was the first Nigerian to be commissioned as a military officer. Then the Wellington Bassis, the Agui Ironsis, the Ademoleguns, and so on. All these other officers, albeit they were commissioned before Maimalari by about a year or two, 2 or 3 years before Maimalari and so on, but they were other ranks. They were non-commissioned officers. They began their army career as clerks, artisans, stallsmen, and so on. And so obviously from recruits, some of them became sergeants, sergeant majors, and so on. Then they went for the officer conversion course, only 3 months. And a point to note here, all these officers also went to an officer training school, at Mons, somewhere in the UK. Mons Officer Training School is not a military academy like Sandhurst, where Maimalari went to. The British government established Mons sometime around the Second World War so as to mass produce officers that would cope with the war effort, But Sandhurst Military Academy had been existing much, much earlier. And this is where professional, regular combatant officers are trained. So Maimalari, together with his childhood friend Lawan Umar, were the first two officers to go there.
Okay, now a lot of writers will write their chapters based on issues of the subject or from historical backgrounds, but you chose to base them on the views expressed by those you interviewed. Why that style of writing?
Yes, I call it an anthological style. The reason is quite simple, really. Somehow, nothing has really been documented about the late Brigadier. And as the world knows, Brigadier Maimalari was killed in the early morning hours of 15 January 1966. Perhaps owing to the convulsions that followed, nothing was documented about the Brigadier. He was never a central subject or focus in any literature. There have been tangential references in other texts, about the Brigadier and so on, but given the greatness of that figure and the contributions he made to the Nigerian army, I felt, okay, look, if I've got to document this guy, this gentleman, I need to bring out authentic facts. And with the paucity of literature on the subject, I myself was very young at the time, barely a few months old. So I said, okay, the only way I could go about this thing is to reach out to those who met him, who worked with him, who went to school with him, and so on. Because there is no other way you could capture anything about the gentleman. As I said, for one reason or the other, records do not exist. No literature exists about the Brigadier. And so I went out to these individuals. Most of the army officers, if not all the army officers that I interviewed, were actually his juniors. I'm talking even from the late General Robert Adeyinka Adebayo to General Yakubu Gowon, down the line. They were all his juniors, because even by the army seniority list, Maimalari was N5. And I think Robert Adebayo was either N7 or N9, or N7, I think, yes.
So he was the most senior military officer at the time?
No, he wasn't. You see, it's important we understand this distinction. The military, as at the time these officers joined the army, there were only two ways an officer could be commissioned. The first being those who were other ranks, who were soldiers. Then they would look at their aptitude and then send them for the officer conversion courses because they were already on the rank and file. Then the other was the Maimalaris that started the second generation of the regular combatant commission officers who went to the academies. So he wasn't the senior in terms of the seniority list the army made. This is because there's been that confusion, and I want to clarify. If you're going by the seniority list, he was N5. Now that seniority list only takes into account officers who were in the army when Nigeria became an independent country.
Second generation.
Not second generation. Okay. The first generation. The serialization, the seniority ranking, that N1, N2, N3, N4, N5, only takes into account the officers that were still serving in the army when Nigeria became independent. This is why somebody like Lieutenant Uboma, who was in fact the first Nigerian to be commissioned, is not reckoned in the N rankings. He's not the N1. It was Wellington Bassey. And for the same reason, you find that Zakaria Memalari's mate, they went to Sandhurst with him, although he only served up to the rank of lieutenant and then left the army. He is also not reckoned because he also left the army in 1956. And Nigeria was not independent. So this is why some people, when they see the title of my book, The First Regular Combatant, they just jump to the conclusion that I meant Brigadier Zakaria Memalari was the most senior officer in the army. No. He was the most senior, he was the first professional, if you like, officer, because the professionalism comes with the regular combatancy in the army. Even today, the army has various kinds of commissions, but the most professional type of commission you can get in the army even today is if you have the regular combatant commission. You see what I mean? So he was the first that had that type of commission.
Okay. Now, I mean, someone who started elementary school at the age of 4, and was born into a royal family, little wonder a lot of people would say that he had a savvy to be detribalized. Coming from Major General Joseph Garba, which in chapter 7 mentioned that he was one of the most detribalized Nigerian. What gave insight to that page?
Well, I wish General Garba was still alive, because the beauty of my work is that nobody would hold me to task, for what the views expressed by those who expressed them. And I tried as much as possible to stick to what they said, other than for the editorial exigencies where they became necessary. But you see, the late General Joseph Garba, an officer who was well remembered who will be well remembered in Nigeria, was one of those who was mentored by the late Brigadier. So he spoke what he saw, and that his chapter tells us. This was the most tribalized officer. And as you would see from some of the officers from other parts of the country who spoke in the book, he was not into tribalism or, religious differences and all that sort of thing. He looked at Nigeria as one entity. His joy, his intention, his dream was just to bring up the officers, core of the Nigerian army. There was nothing about you are Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo, and all that. Those things were never there. And incidentally, that is another motivation. Because if you look at Nigeria today, we seem to be retreating into those fault lines, And for me, I want my generation and those coming behind to know that we had Nigerians like that.
The people you interviewed also were emphatic that the civil war would not have happened if the Brigadier General would have survived the coup. Saying that the General Gowon and Ojukwu would have listened to him and classically shut up on the matter. Well, why do you think they made such statements?
Because it was the truth. You see, Memalari was a charismatic figure. He was not only the most learned officer in the army, he was the most respected, even feared, as His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari stated in his own account. He said Memalari was revered in his time. So he was a man that if he spoke, nobody actually countered him. And if you look at what late General Emmanuel Abisoye said, he said he was like an eagle among them. He soared above all the others. So if he was alive, according to what was explained in that section you're making reference to, if he summoned General Gowon and said, look, this thing that's happening, we're speaking hypothetically, that if he had been alive and you had this contention between Gowon and Ojukwu, he would have just told both of them to literally, as a military officer, would say, shut up and get out of here, and they would have, obeyed him. This is what has been said. And then again, the pain of the officer corps, especially the young officers, was that their mentor, their role model, had been killed unnecessarily in that coup. So that pain was what later created, the counter coups and the convulsions that followed, including the civil war in Nigeria. If he had been around, he wouldn't have condoned all those divisions, and the military would have rallied around him. If he spoke, everybody would have listened to him. That is what is being meant there.
Okay, so Zakaria Memalari grew up in a royal home where his mother wasn't available to protect him at the time. He was sent into school to attend a Western education, which was a taboo at the time. And he became very prosperous and well-known and was called the goalkeeper. The mom began to take pride in that. Do you think all of that experience, as childhood experience, probably shaped him for future ambitions, and the charisma that he carried, the gait that he carried that endeared him to so many of his friends and later in life officers? Do you think that actually contributed?
Oh, certainly. Because even from his family, as you saw in the account, he was the first to go to school. And so the advantages that came with formal Western education obviously rubbed off on him. And that experience, of learning beyond the basic Quranic education that most youth will have at the time, the exposure he got. And incidentally, it's not just at the elementary school, right through to middle school. I spoke with some of his mates and contemporaries up to Barrel College. And even if you read the book, even the European assessors, his instructors and so on, senior officers when he was at the Royal Military Academy in Sanders, they all spoke about his tenacious intellect. He was somebody who liked to worry out things for himself. So he was an independent and brilliant mind, you see. So obviously the leadership qualities were things, in fact, Justice Mama Nasser says that he was even, they used to call him soldier because of the charisma, the gait, the way he conducted and carried himself. So you could see that he was molded with the leadership attributes right from those formative stages.
Brigadier Samuel Ubemedia in chapter 26 said Malari's killers felt that his intelligence, his ability and efficiency were just too much for them. How ironic would that be, considering the fact that after he was killed in 1966, one of the officers, Agui Ronsi, took over as commander-in-chief?
Yes, and I suppose that dovetails into what late Brigadier Ogbemudia was trying to say. Because if you look at his contributions, he was explicit and clear. He said, look, when the British were about to leave, there was a particular category of officers that they wanted to succeed them in the officer corps of the army. And that he mentioned, I think, about 4 of them, Ronsi himself, Ademulegun, Ogundipe, and Memalari. But if I remember, his exact words was that Memalari stood neck and shoulder above all the others. He said it. It's there in the book. So, it's like, as I told you, there was no tribalism. These assessments and views were expressed at a time when Nigeria was united. There was no question of, he's from the north and from the south, or he doesn't belong to my ethnic group or my religious persuasion. There was nothing like that. They spoke honestly and sincerely. He was the best, So he was, in fact, the late Brigadier Ogbemudia was so emotional when I told him I was writing this book. And he said to me, one of his greatest fears was that nothing would be written on Memalari until the time he passed on. And before I went to soon after I went to whereabouts, Brigadier Ogbemudia, as the world knows, has passed on today. But I'm happy that he and a lot of others who have passed on, but who contributed to the book, I feel I have sort of fulfilled their wish that today we are going to, we'll be launching this book tomorrow about the late Brigadier Zakemu.
I remember when you detailed the incident that happened on 15th January 1966, where he hosted a party at his residence in Ikoyi. Yes. And in the early hours of the January 16th of that morning, some officers came back and tried to assassinate him. He exited through the backyard where he was taken down by the brigade major, and shot to death. That also tells you the psychology in the military, that the people nearest to you are the people who, you fear the most. Because apparently what you see that happened was that when he eluded the attack indoors, he found out that it was the man he trusted most was the person who took his life. Do you still see that happening in the current military regime, where you find out that a lot of people, a lot of conversations, are still on divided lines based on hierarchy?
Okay. Thank you for that question, though it's a rather tricky one for me to answer. See, first of all, I'm not a military officer, and so I cannot speak for the present mindset or the assessments of the Nigerian military. And I certainly have not conducted any research on the modern or the present-day Nigerian army. My research is even not on the army, but on an individual, and goes back to over half a century ago. However, that the one closest to another, even from Julius Caesar's, the case of Brutus killing Julius Caesar, you see there is that historical, if you like, pattern or occurrence where, yes, that person close to you sometimes becomes the one who either overthrows you or kills you. And I think that is not really unique to the military. It is just because he who is close to you knows your secret the most, and therefore your weaknesses. So it's more of a human phenomenon than is something unique to the military. Having said that, I look at the military today, the Nigerian military today, from a distance. I feel they have done so much. Really, they have. You know, for the insurgency in the northeast, the militancy in the Niger Delta, the so-called herdsmen issues here in the north, they've been out there, they've united this country. And whatever minuses we might observe on the part of our military, we should not forget the pluses. They're still doing a lot, making huge sacrifices. And they've become more apolitical now than in the immediate years preceding this period, because things like military interventions now are virtually impossible, because they have become more professional, more detached from partisan politics and all that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at the admonition the Prime Minister at the time, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, and the Defense Minister admonished Brigadier Malari to be patient and accept the appointment of Ironsi as GOC, since Ironsi is senior. When you look at the positioning of the army at the time, you know, when the Prime Minister had to intervene, considering the fact that Agu Ironsi was replaced ahead of Mai Malari. What was all that about?
Okay, I'll explain it.
Yes.
You see, first of all, let's be clear. Agu Ironsi, at least by rank at that time, was senior to Zakaria Mai Malari. From the account of the Deputy Permanent Secretary Defense at the time, who is the Maradin Katsina, Alhaji Ahmad Ukurifi, he's still alive. He was the Deputy Permanent Secretary, Minister of Defense. And he knew all those officers. It's there in his account, incidentally. He said to me, I knew all of them personally. They were my friends. They all became colonels, full colonels, at the same time. That is Agui Ironsi, Ademulegun, Ogundipe, and Mai Malari. All of them became full colonels at the same time. However, there was what they used to call those of them who served from the ranks, that is all of them apart from Mai Malari. You see, the years they spent on the ranks were noted. So when you are made an officer, you gain seniority, accelerated seniority. So at the time, Ironsi was a colonel together with them, but because of years, he was a bit senior.
All right, just to interrupt there, because we're almost top of the hour. Where is the venue for the public launching of the book and the time?
Okay, great. The book the public presentation will be tomorrow, Tuesday, 4th of July, at the International Conference Center by 10 o'clock. Right. We are having His Excellency, the Acting President, as the special guest of honor. We have General Yakubu Gawan as the chairman of the occasion. We have Lieutenant General Abdurrahman Dambazo, the Minister of Interior, as the chairman of the organizing committee.
Okay, we'll hold you on that frame of thought. We'll definitely continue with that analogy after Pan-African World. Stay with us. Pan-African World. The Chief Justice of Nigeria, Walter Onoyen, has advised Nigerians, especially those in governance, to do away with impunity and uphold the rule of law and rules of engagement in their line of duties, warning that the law will not spare anyone found guilty, no matter how highly placed. Justice Onoyen gave this advice in Calabar during a reception organizing his honor by the Cross River State government as the first indigent of the state to head the nation's judiciary, while calling for total support and prayers in his effort to sanitize the judiciary. Justice Onoyen said the era of impunity, which has drawn the country backward, is no longer fashionable. Cross River State Governor Ben Ayade said that the state decided to hold a reception in his honor as means of encouraging him to strengthen the nation's judiciary. Ayade, who presented him a copy of a customized Bible, said he should always pray. The reception was witnessed by a cross-section of Nigerians from different walks of life, both within and from outside Cross River State. A Mali-based Al-Qaeda affiliate has released a video of 6 foreign hostages ahead of a visit by French President Emmanuel Macron to the country. They include a French NGO worker, an elderly Australian surgeon, and a Colombian nun. The video says no genuine negotiations to release them have taken place. Macron is in Mali to consolidate Western backing for a regional force against the militants. Among the hostages seen in the footage is Sophie Petronin, who was abducted last December in the town of Gao, where she ran an NGO helping malnourished children. Macron said France would put all energy towards eradicating those who had kidnapped Miss Petronin. Germany, France and Italy's interior ministers are to meet for crisis talks as Italy warns that the influx of migrants into the country is unsustainable. Italy has threatened to close its ports and impound rescue ships run by aid agencies carrying people from Libya. The UN's refugee agency said it needs more support as people cross the Mediterranean Sea from Africa in large numbers. Now, more than 500,000 migrants have passed through Italian ports since 2014, and numbers are on the rise again. Italy is the main destination for migrants attempting to reach Europe by sea due to its proximity to Libya. Most migrants make the journey across the Mediterranean in rickety boats, and the UN estimates that 2,030 migrants have died or gone missing since the start of the year. And that's it for Pan-African World. We'll continue our conversation. Do stay with us.
All right, Haruna Yahya Poloma, the author of The First Combatant, Brigadier Zakaria Memalari, is still with us in the studio. Just before we went on that, so we were talking about the impact Memalari had on the Nigerian army, considering the fact that he was murdered at a time where there was some level of ethnic tension and ethnic division within the country. Did the killing of Zakaria aggravate that particular division, either within the army or outside the army?
Well, again, I'll remind our viewers that I was myself a very young person, but the good thing here is a lot of others have written, about that era, and not just the military. Yes, there were political tensions, and somehow those divisions tended to assume some ethnic dimensions. The officers, particularly the military officers that I interviewed, and I would here give examples with, take somebody like the late the late Colonel Tony Eze. Tony Eze, I think he was from Imo State. But the interesting thing, he was one of the few Sanders trained officers at the time, and he's from the Eastern region, what was then the Eastern region. And he said to me that it was that killing that actually created deeper cleavages, if you like, along those ethnic lines, because of people like Emmanuel Ifeajuna. And in Tony Eze's account, he was the first Nigerian, incidentally, to head the signal corps of the Nigerian army. He took over from the British officers, so he should know what he's talking about. And he said in his account, which the world will read, even though he passed away last year, but the world will see that he insists it's people like Ifeajuna who are not properly trained officers. He went to Sandhurst. He should know what he's saying. And that people like Ifeajuna, because they were graduates, they tended to make a lot of trouble, having read certain courses in civil institutions and just undergone 3 to at most 6 months training to become officers. So they came with their political ideologies and so on and so forth, Ademuegas and all those officers that participated. They had this, having gone far to university level, so they had this kind of radical ideas. And that led them to stage coups, because the professional officers that went to Sandhurst, they were told explicitly at Sandhurst, you don't intervene with civil authority. You don't do that.
All right, let's look at chapter 42, which is where General Olusegun Obasanjo premieres. And, I take a quote from him. He said this. He said, Zakaria Malari was a straight shooter, so I liked him. He might have been a bit undiplomatic, as he's also said about some of us today, but I always believe that a soldier may need to be tactful, but he doesn't need to be diplomatic.
So, I'm happy Baba is still very much with us. Incidentally, Chief Olusegun Obasanjo is going to be our guest speaker. So, and I understand AIT will be there with us. So probably he will expatiate more on that. But I think it's a very, very brilliant thing to say.
Of course.
That statement should go down in history. It's vintage Chief Obasanjo. Only he could say it like that.
When we talk about history, especially Nigerian history, as it concerns the Civil War, it's kind of different depending on who is telling the story. Looking at the killing of Zakaria Malari and how it actually entrenched political divisions in the country, do you think that there should be some level of conversation at this time where there is so much agitation from different parts of this country, a conversation to probably bring to bear the real account of the Nigerian history and Civil War?
Yes, I think this book is coming out to me in the right time, and that has been the consensus of opinions that I've had as feedback. The reason is because some of the cleavages, some of the divisions that are still haunting Nigeria are things that I've been battling with over the years. And I think part of that is because of the lack of knowledge of history. Why am I saying this? If you look at some of the agitators of some of these fringe groups, I call them fringe groups, whether it be from the northeast or the southeast or the Niger Delta or whatever, these fringe elements that are, sort of heating up our polity, most of them are really people that don't know much about Nigerian history. They don't. Because if they did, they would come to understand, one, that at one time Nigerians were living as a united people. We were together. That is why you hear the story of Malam Umaru Altine, Tilde, who was the first elected mayor of Enugu, a Fulani man. This is a historical fact. That is why I was reading sometime last week about Kwankwaso town in Kano. Apparently it was set up by one Mr. Okonko. So many people from the southeast coming to the north to settle and become this and vice versa. Now, they don't know this. And then you come and talk, they talk about divisions simply because they have grievances. And yes, some of these grievances might be genuine, but they do not justify calls for breakups and creating tension among peace-loving Nigerians, So I think knowing history would
it's very practical. All right, tell us again about the venue and date and time so that
yes,
the
okay.
viewers can be
Thank you. Like I said earlier on, the launch would commence tomorrow, July 4th at 10 a.m. at the International Conference Center here in Abuja. As I was saying, we have the chairman of the organizing committee is Lieutenant General Abdurrahman Dambazo, the current Minister of Interior. The chairman of the presentation ceremony is His Excellency General Yakubu Gawan. The book reviewer is General Senator Ike Nwachuku. The chief presenter is Alhaji Aminu Dantata. The co-presenters are Alhaji Aliko Dangote, Alhaji Muhammadu Indimi, and of course there will be many elder statesmen, retired and serving generals, members of the diplomatic corps, state governors, and so on. So it promises to be a book presentation that perhaps there has never been any quite like it in the history of Nigeria.
Yes. Thank you so much. I mean, according to Colonel Madu Ali, who was then Army Medical Deputy Director, Army Medical Services, said, as a person, Brigadier Zakaria Melmelari was a very fine gentleman, a very good officer, a thorough professional, and tremendous foresight. In fact, his foresight was totally unbelievable.
Well, thank you so much. Haruna Yahya Poloma is the author of the first regular combatant, Brigadier Zakaria Melmelari, and the book launches today. So be there. Well, our next conversation is centered on increasing kidnapping in Nigeria, the handling of the Evans case. So stay with us.
Right back.